Once they had both seated themselves, Ryan and his three friends also said the table was so long that they were 20 yards away from Rachel and the Baron. Harvey clapped his hands, and servants, dressed in the livery of the Ville, appeared bearing platters and tureens and great serving dishes. Ryan had somehow expected it would be the same blue dinner service with the willow pattern design that he'd eaten from during his childhood. As the meal began, he realized why that no longer existed. The Baron Cotter was an intemperate and a violently clumsy eater. There was no sequence of courses, such as soup followed by fish, followed by game, followed by salad, followed by a main course of meat, with desserts and then cheese and fruit. Everything came at once. The servants lined up at the far end of the table while their lord and master ladled out slopping portions of anything that caught his eye. He piled it all into a bowl in front of him. It must have been able to hold 5 gallons of liquid, or 30 pounds of solid food. At that distance it was difficult for them to see what precisely went into the bowl, but the servants eventually made their way to the guests' end of the table. Lady Rachel only indicated a small portion of steamed fish for herself, with a spoonful of sugar peas. She took only water to drink. Ryan had rarely seen a more spectacular array of food. There was steak, great hunks of horse meat, marinated in white port wine, lamb cutlets with a red fruit sauce, pork, over fat, smothered in honey and wild ginger, flounders served with toasted almonds, bowls of shrimps wallowing in a pepper sauce, and crabs still in their shells. Meat that Christie identified as turkey, pallid and waxen, dripping with melted goat's cheese and crushed peppercorns, tomatoes and onions and sour cream, sprinkled with mushrooms and little green berries, a thick gray-brown soup that had unnervingly dozens of hard-boiled eggs bobbing greasily around in it, potatoes and rutabagas and beans, minced and fried in gravy. There were also bowls of fruit, cooked and raw, mostly sweet and sickly sauces that drenched them. There was water to drink, or a thick lilac-colored liqueur that had an unusual taste.
Yeah, like something a gaudy whore would bathe in.
JB struggled to conceal his disgust at the scented flavor, opting for the water instead. He followed Rachel Cotter's example and took only a portion of boiled fish and a side helping of vegetables. Ryan chose a steak, finding it grievously underdone, blood seeping from the meat before he even laid a knife into it. He ladled some fried beans on the side, and discovered they'd been soaked with grated red chilies that almost took the skin off his tongue. Christie contented herself with a chipped goblet of spring water and some of the potatoes, which had been fried in butter. She also took a couple of slices of the whole wheat bread from the wooden board, which was carried by an elderly man with trembling hands, who kept his head bowed and didn't look at any of the guests. With a shudder, Christie noticed that the old servant's hands had been branded several times. His fingers and knuckles showed the unmistakable signs of having been brutally broken more than once.
Is the food good, Brother Thursby?
Harvey Cotter's face and beardless chins were beslobbered with runnels of grease, carrying particles of several different courses of the meal. His piggy little eyes had almost vanished behind rolls of fat.
Locked up right now.
Yeah, Baron Cotter.
Shit. Eating better from a double-poor Swampy's chuck-out pile.
What did the Whitehead say?
Rachel Cotter's blazing eyes focused on Ryan. Good food, my lady.
I have lost the taste for food, Master Thursby. I no longer get any pleasure from the act of eating.
Her hands folded over each other, fingers writhing like 10 white snakes. As they watched, ignoring her grunting the woman fumbled in her black purse and took out a circular mirror with an ornately sculpted edge where tiny dragons fought amid a tangled forest. It was another of the Cotter heirlooms. She also removed a small sliver of polished steel and a tiny brown vial, which was tightly corked.
Choked.
Ryan had already recognized what was happening. The woman was probably addicted to the hallucinogenic mix of coke and mescaline. Not everyone became brutally addicted. Icy slope that turned fast all the way to the bottom. If Lady Rachel combines a jolt in the middle of a public meal, then the bottom of the slope couldn't be that far away for her. Ryan finally realized who the customer was of the jolt dealers he killed. While Harvey Carter snuffled and grunted his way through his trough of food, his wife methodically began her preparations for doing the drug. Ryan and the others continued to eat quietly, occasionally begging to one of the silent servants for more bread or vegetables. Rachel eased the cork from the narrow neck of a small tinted bottle, tipping a hand of thin forefinger, lowering her head over the mirror. She snipped up one of the lines of jolt, moved quickly to the next line, and then the next. Eventually, all 6 lines of the iridescent powder had been snorted. Her body shook, characteristic tremors that gave the drug its common nickname. Rachel's breath came in sharp gasps, and her eyes rolled back in their sockets. Her husband totally ignored her convulsions, busy as he was, with rending strips of meat off the carcass of an unidentifiable fowl.
Ah, yes. Yes.
Her breathing slowed down again. She licked the mirror clean with a long, feline tongue, then tucked all the jolt paraphernalia back into her purse. Looking up, the eyes of the 4 strangers were on her. "Good, my lady?"
Better than good, Master Thursby.
She licked her lips very slowly as she looked at him.
It is better than anything. Better than the most wonderful fucking you can imagine. Better than pain. Better even than death.
And we know how much you enjoy death, don't we, dearest mother?
None of them had heard the newcomer arrive in the home. Ryan noticed immediately how the servants backed away, eyes cast down. The old man with the bread salver came within an inch of dropping it, face angled to the stone floor. The light from the numerous beeswax candles danced off a polished orb of amethyst at the end of the gold chain around the young man's slender throat. He was dressed in a coat and trousers of black velvet and black boots. In his belt was a small high-velocity dart gun that fired a cluster of razored metal projectiles only a half-inch long, their shafts barbed to make withdrawal difficult and damaging.
Jabez, you have come to join us?
Of course. We have guests so rarely. And they stay for such a short time.
Ryan looked curiously at his nephew. Harvey's son was in his late teens, of average height and build, with a face that seemed oddly unbalanced. The right side was higher and more angular, the corner of the eye twisted and pulled down, as though the young man was continuously blinking. Jabez's complexion had a deathly pallor, as if the light of the sun were never permitted anywhere near him. His hairline was receding, hair cut short, and of a nondescript brown color. Rachel Carter reached out for her only child.
Come kiss me, son of my lords.
While the others looked on, Jabez strode the length of the table, stooped, and kissed his mother on the cheek. A dutiful, filial kiss. As he straightened, he caught Ryan's eye on him and smiled, which sent a chill down Ryan's spine.
More, mother dearest.
The boy leaned and gently lifted Rachel's face to his. He lowered his mouth onto hers, pressing it over her parted lips. As he leaned across her, he allowed his left hand to drift over the front of her dress until it cupped Rachel's right breast. Lady Rachel Carter made a helpless gesture of resistance, then gave herself up to him. When he finally released her, Jabez's mother was flushed and panting, smiling up at her son and holding his hand in hers. Even from where he sat, Ryan could see the unmistakable bulge pressing at the front of the lordling's breeches. Baron Harvey Carter ate on, never lifting his eyes from his bowl.
Gaia!
Christy pushed her plate away in disgust. Eat it. Let him know it matters. Jabez finally turned away from his mother and totally ignored his father.
You've traveled far, Master Thursby, I hear.
We have traveled many miles for many years, my Lord Jabez.
And you have lost an eye. How careless.
It is common enough in the Deathlands, and an arm or a leg, or even a mind. As though he were bored, Jabez sat and beckoned over his shoulder to the servants to bring him food, taking only chunks of pork.
Bring that here!
When Harvey finished a plate, he would knock it from the hands of the particular servant with a grunt of rage that rose high and thin like the scream of a gelded animal. Down at the other end of the table, there was no conversation between Jack, JB, Christy, and Brian, each locked in his or her own thoughts. Brian's mind was whirling at the visible madness that ran the bill. Harvey was a double crazy who would eat himself into the grave within the next few months. His wife was psychotically withdrawn and obviously dependent on Jolt. From the junkies Ryan had seen, the woman would also be dead within the year. And that would leave her incestuous son, Jabez. The security at Front Royal was tight, primed with fear, and it would be hard to find a way of slaughtering his brother and family. Their insanity was both a plus and a minus. This needed careful consideration.
A rabbit, Master Thursby.
You're well informed.
Thieves are blinded in parts of Deathlands, Thursby.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Are you a thief, Thursby? You and the killer and the two mutants. Killers, are you? Are they killers, Mother? Should I take them once quiet and ask them?
Rachel didn't answer, but Harvey looked up, eyes bright amid the smeared food.
I'm eating, you filthy little bastard. Fuck off. Go on, get away from my table before I...
What'll you do, Father? Thursby the killer and his friends.
They can leave after breaking their fast tomorrow morning. I'm going with them. Hear me, Thursby? You can go tomorrow.
Thank you, Baron Carter. Ryan's mind raced. That meant they must do what they could during the night. There was that secret door between his room and Christie's.
More of those eggs.
Ryan's brother struggled to look over his hunched shoulder for that particular delicacy. Rachel was sitting back in her chair, waving a hand dreamily to and fro. Like her husband and her son, the woman marched to the beat of a different drummer.
Your hair is beautiful.
Jabez pushed his own seat back so hard that it crashed over onto the floor. Brian felt a pang of concern. The young man moved with a lethal elegance, allowing his hand to drift over the carved chairs, gesturing for the old man with the breadboard to step out of his way. When he reached Christie, he stopped, his eyes flicking between Brian and his mother. There was something about Brian that bothered him. That was clear. His hand darted out like a striking adder and tugged at the cord that kept Christie's flowing scarlet hair bound up. It tumbled about her shoulders in such a cascade of light and color that even the Baron was distracted from his eating for a moment.
So pretty, pretty, pretty. Tonight I'll come and visit. Oh, but not a word to Mother. She gets so jealous.
Jack laid his fork down on the china plate, his knuckles whitening on the hilt of the table knife. JB caught his eye and made a subtle, cautionary movement with his hand. Ryan watched Christie's face, seeing the green eyes narrow, then close. The girl was fighting for inner control against the hand that rested on her shoulder, then began to caress her nape. Jabez was staring beyond Christie's head, smiling gently at his mother, who now sat up straight and looked at him, emotionless, slate-eyed.
Your hair is the most beautiful hair I've ever seen. It's so soft and so silky.
For a splinter of a second, Ryan thought Christie had succumbed to the temptation to use the awesome power of her Earth Mother against Jabez. Then he realized that the young man had been startled by Christie's sentient hair, which had coiled and tangled around his fingers. Everyone in the room looked up, including the doddering old man who carried the bread. The old man's eyes fastened for the first time on Ryan, and his mouth sagged open in shock. The hand shot out and pointed.
By the martyrs, our prayers are answered! Lord Ryan himself has come back!
There was a moment of utter silence. Everyone reacted in different ways to the shock. If Ryan had been counting the beats of his own heart, he would have reached 20 before anything happened in the banquet hall. Harvey Carter lifted his porcine face from his dish very slowly, staring at Ryan with an expression of growing horror. Lady Rachel unfolded her hands and carefully laid each one, as if it were a rare piece of porcelain, on the linen cloth in front of her. Her face didn't alter as she absorbed the news. Jabez Pendragon Carter took a dozen slow steps backward in the direction of the fireplace. His eye blinked rapidly, and his hand began to creep toward the dart gun at his belt.
Ryan, my brother?
Harvey shook his head stupidly.
How can
Dead! You're dead! Dead for 20 years! Bones and blood! But you shall stay dead, Uncle!
Jabez drew the blaster and aimed it at the center of Ryan's chest, finger white on the slim trigger, lips peeled back off his yellow teeth in an expression of tiger-like delight. Ryan had known this moment would come one day. If you lived your life by the blaster, it was certain that eventually you'd die by it. He heard Christie sounding a far way off, calling his name, but he sat there and looked into the eyes of his nephew, waiting for the shock of death. But his death was not to come that day. The old man moved first, lightning fast for his age. Mouth working, he stood there, stunned with everyone else.
Lord Carter, forgive me! Oh!
Then he threw himself at Jabez Carter, clawing at the young man's face. Ryan heard the distinctive sound of the dart gun, and the servant's body jerked backward like a gaffed salmon. With arms flung out, he toppled over, blood frothing from his open mouth, darkening the front of his uniform. He lay there, legs twitching, dulled eyes staring blankly at the vaulted ceiling of the hall, as if he never noticed it before. His lips moved as he tried to speak, and he struggled to turn his head toward Ryan.
Sorry.
And then the old man died. Jabez spat at him and wrestled with the stubborn mechanism before recocking the blaster. The Sekman started to move in, and Jack leapt to his feet, going for a Sekman with a table knife, cutting the man's forearm to the bone before he was clubbed to the rush-covered floor. Ryan, JB, and Christie didn't resist. Trader used to say that there was a time to fight, but more important was the time he decided not to fight. The stones would have been awash with blood if Lady Rachel had not acted. She raised her hand.
Alive! Take them all alive! Chain Ryan and lock up the others! Triple guard!
And so it happened. Jack was carried away unconscious, bleeding from a gash on his temple. The others walked, escorted by Sekmen, back to their chambers. On the way, Ryan looked around and saw that the tall sergeant was still in charge of them.
One question.
What?
That old man who died.
Yeah, what of?
Who was he? Didn't recognize him.
He knew you, didn't he? Lord Ryan Calder. You can try to deny it. You sat there like a kid messed his pants.
Didn't intend to come and die with Harlan. Wasn't the plan.
What was?
The Sec officer held up his gauntleted fist to halt the escort.
Come on, Lord Ryan. You'll tell me sooner or later. So what was it? Murder the family and then rule yourself as the Baron of Front Royal?
Yes to the first, and maybe to the second. You still didn't tell me his name. The sergeant moved closer, grinning.
Oh, you like this, Lord Ryan? Remember little Kenny Morse?
Of course. If it hadn't been for Kenny, I'd have died at 15. He saved me.
You know what
He
happened?
was murdered. I heard that recently.
Yeah, that was his brother Will, who just mistakenly betrayed you in there. Funny, isn't it?
No, not really. Some miles away, deep in the forest of the Shens, Nathan Freeman was leading Doc Tanner and Lori Quint along winding paths. Picking his way carefully, he stopped frequently to listen for any sound of man or beast. They were heading toward the rambling fortress of Front Royal. The chain around Ryan's throat bit into his skin and was drawn so tight that breathing was difficult. It held his head still, strained up and back. The steel of the handcuffs was pitted with age, but the action was greased and clicked home, and squeezed so hard that the ends of his fingers were swollen and sore. But he'd felt worse. At least the sergeant hadn't taken the opportunity to give him a beating, merely checking that the cuffs and the throttle chain were secure. He fixed the end of the links to a heavy iron ring that was built into the stone of the wall.
Now you wait, my lord.
I wasn't going to move anyway. Could you put out the lamps? Don't disturb my sleep.
If you weren't who you are, and if you weren't going where you're going, I swear I'd get on those right.
When will my brother come?
Baron's not well, seeing you come up like a skeleton out of the tomb. Had himself some drink, did the Baron. On the bar, he has to ride out to Fisher's Hill. Baron wouldn't miss that. It'll give you a day to swim.
Tomorrow night, then?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. There. Dimmed all the lamp for the one. Need that to watch through the Judas hole in the door. Sleep well, Lord Calder.
The Segman had told him that the other three were also locked in their rooms, but none of them was to be tied. And Jack had recovered consciousness from a blow to his head. They would all take their turn being interrogated by Baron Harvey Cotter. There was a warm glow from the lamp that stood on an old polished round table near the barred window. The draperies had been closed, leaving only a chink near the top. It was full dark outside. From where he lay on the floor of the chamber, Ryan could hear the noises of the Ville as life went on. He guessed that the news of his return would already have raced through the big building, until the meanest scullery boy would know that Ryan Cotter was back at Front Royal, oiled and ready to tear some ass. Ryan managed a wry grin. He was resigned to the fact of his imminent death. It was simply a question of how and when. JB, Jack, and Christie would also perish. There was a slim chance that Doc and the girl might get away. Ryan hoped so. He liked Laurie, but he was coming to love the eccentric old man. The only hope left now to Ryan was that they might get careless at the end and give him a chance to at least settle the old debt by killing his brother. He could do it easily enough with his bare hands, given just a couple of seconds and a scant yard of space. Somewhere he could catch the distant sound of a piano playing, and he wondered who was at the keyboard. An aunt of his had come to the Ville when Ryan had been 8 years old, an immensely tall, skinny woman whose name escaped him. It was some sort of flower, he thought. She loved dancing, and had teased the solemn young boy by snatching him as they passed in one of the long corridors. Pressing him to her flat, bony chest, she'd called out to him,
Heel and toe. Heel and toe. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Lovely, Ryan. Lovely.
As the wasting sickness that had killed her begun to set its teeth in her body, she'd grown more melancholy. Once she'd been playing an old tape of music, a dance tune called a tango. She looked up at him, a thin bird-like face, with eyes bright and fevered, and bones scraping at the inside of her skin.
They say the tango is a merry rhythm, Ryan. It is not. It is infinitely mournful.
She died a week later, had been buried in the family plot with the rest of the Lamb Carters, back to the long winter. Ryan didn't recognize the tune the piano was playing. After a while it ceased, and he slipped into an uneasy sleep. The rattle of the spy hole woke him, and he peered across the room. The lamp was burning low, near to guttering out, and the chamber smelled of oil. There was a momentary flash of brighter light as the door opened a narrow crack and then closed again. Someone slipped through the gap, and for a split second Ryan allowed himself a glimmer of hope, knowing the foolishness of such a thought.
On your life, trooper. I'll spill your heart blood myself, not until I'm not to be let out. Understand?
Yes, ma'am.
There was plenty of light for Ryan to immediately recognize Lady Rachel Cotter, wearing the same dark clothes and carrying the same worn leather purse. Without a word, she knelt at his side, drawing a slim-bladed stiletto from her belt. The point rested for a moment on the material of his pants, just above his groin. She began to push, the steel slicing through the material, touching cold on the flesh of his stomach.
Now.
The knife was very old. Ryan had never seen it before, but he knew that the Ville had once housed a remarkable collection of early weapons of all sorts. The hilt was silver, heavily embossed with floral decoration, and the blade was steel. He tried to relax against the sharp pricking of the knife as she moved it lower and lower. Despite himself, Ryan winced and tried to ease himself down, avoiding the steel as it brushed the top of his penis.
So brave, brother-in-law. Yet so like all men, filled with stupid pride until your pathetic little pricks are threatened.
Garvey wouldn't like me spoiled. She patted him on the cheek, running a sharp nail along the jagged scar that furrowed his face.
He did that. And the eye. He talks of it. When he sleeps, wrapped by horrors, he talks of you. He knew you'd come back one day. Knew it. You're his walking nightmare, Ryan Carter.
Ryan didn't speak. The knife was still poised, like a honed nemesis, ready to descend and hack at his manhood. She was very beautiful. Ryan corrected that thought. She had once been very beautiful. Now she was rattled by the jolt.
You can't move. I could do anything to you, dear mother-in-law. Anything. I could rape you. Use that cock of yours, then cut it off. I could kiss you. Make you kiss me. Make you use your tongue on my body. Would you like that, brother-in-law?
She was leaning across him, her breath running faster. The front of her dress gaped open, and he could see her breasts, the nipples erect with desire.
What would you like, Ryan?
I'd like you to die, and take your husband and that sick little bastard of a son with you. He waited for the thrust of the knife, but nothing happened. Ryan opened his eye. Rachel had sat back on her heels, the velvet dress hitched up between her knees, showing a smooth expanse of pure thigh.
You talk big for a helpless, one-eyed man, Ryan Carter.
Cut the bullshit. Why are you here?
I wanted to see you. Wanted to see you before that sottish husband of mine had you thrown to his boars or his dogs or whatever unoriginal way of chilling he'd fix.
Ryan didn't reply. There was nothing